This slideshow will focus on the debates and process of ratifying the Constitution. Now remember, the Constitutional Convention was this behind doors thing that was done very secretly. And so as soon as it was done and they had a paper that was signed, they rushed home as quick as they could to try and get these conventions together in their states to ratify and start the Constitution going. Now, each state would have to hold this convention. They would have to debate it. They would have to vote on it. But it only took 9 of the states to vote for it to go into effect. So they started to, or as soon as people started to find out about what had come out of this constitutional convention, they started to realize, oh my gosh, this is completely different. And they started to argue about whether it should be put in place or shouldn't. The first group of people, and really the first political party in America, was the Federalists. And the Federalists were people that supported the Constitution. They liked how it was set up. They supported the extra power happening for the federal government. And so these supporters of the Constitution really picked their name in a very important way. Like they really paid attention when they picked their name, because they picked their name by emphasizing the federal system. Federalists, they were for the federal system, which showed that we were dividing power between the central and state government. Remember, federal system means divided power between those central, that main government, and the state government. Okay, and the reason they chose this as a name was to remind people, yes, we are adding power to the central government, which is scary for America because they had just gotten done with a war, or fighting a war, because there was too much power in a central government. And what they wanted to do with this name was to remind people that states also get to keep a lot of the powers in with this Constitution that they had built. Now, the people that were actually Federalists, who were they? Okay, there were these large property owners, richer people, merchants in the larger cities, so people that traded across state lines and across country lines, and artisans, people that made stuff in America. And the reason that they felt, or that they were for the Constitution, is because they thought this stronger central government could protect their business. This central government can put some of the like tariffs and duties on other countries that would protect their businesses from being overrun by the cheaper British goods. And also farmers that were living on the coast or by the rivers and were shipping goods to other states, and that's how they made their money, was to sell this stuff to other states or other countries. Their whole life was dependent on trade, and if trade could fall apart in a second because Maryland puts a new tax on something, that's not good for those people. And so those people that depended on trade, these farmers living there, they needed a strong federal government to keep trade moving forward and keep it under control. The other side, the other political party that would come up, was called the Anti-Federalists, and their name is kind of strange, right? They're against the Constitution, but they're not actually against federalism, so their name doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But their concern was not that we should not have a national government. They knew that they needed a national government, but they wanted the state governments to be the ones that were the most powerful. And they felt that if we had this big, strong government in the middle, this national government, then it was going to be a problem, and the state governments might lose some of that independence that they felt. Okay, there were a lot of very powerful and smart people at the beginning of our country that were anti-federalists. People like John Hancock and Patrick Henry and Richard Henry Lee from Virginia, the governor of New York, George Clinton. Okay, even 2 members of the Constitutional Convention, right here, we got these guys, okay, Edmund Randolph and George Mason, they turned to anti-federalists, even though they had helped make the Constitution, because they thought there should have been a Bill of Rights put in. Samuel Adams would also kind of take on that idea. So we can see some of these guys up here in this picture. Samuel Adams would also take on the idea of, we need this Bill of Rights. All right, so who are these people? Who are the people that were for the Anti-Federalists? Many of them were these Western farmers. These Western farmers, they kind of felt they were out in the middle of nowhere. They felt like they were self-sufficient. They were taking care of themselves, and they didn't trust rich people, essentially. And so a lot of their problem was they were in deep debt and owed these rich people a lot of money. And they thought what the whole reason for the Constitution was a way to get rid of the paper money that was letting them pay their debts back easily and foreclose on their farms and take over their farms and take them away. So they just kind of didn't trust this new government. Take a moment to write out your answer to this checkpoint question. So the arguments quickly turned public and were put into newspapers and published all over the place. All right, the Anti-Federalists, their campaign, it was kind of doomed from the beginning because they ran a really negative campaign. Their argument, even though they had a lot of smart people on their side, their argument was that we should not have the Constitution, that it failed to protect our basic rights, and that was it. They didn't have a plan for what to do or what we should do. They just said this doesn't do what we want it to do. It doesn't protect our rights. All right. And the Federalists, however, they had a plan. They had it exactly down. They had the Constitution. They had an organized, convincing, and they had kind of the newspapers on their side, the richer people, right? And so they created this collection of essays called the Federalist, and you can see over here we've got the cover, the first page of the Federalist, and it was a collection of 85 essays that were written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, really smart, our very first leaders in America here, and they went under the name Publius. Okay, they used the name Publius just as a pen name, all right, instead of using their own names. And they went around and published these essays in newspapers around New York, because New York was this hotbed, this area where there were a lot of Anti-Federalists, and they really needed New York on their side to be able to push this through. And so they published these in New York newspapers, and then they collected them all together and published them. All right, and what this did essentially is it explained the whole new framework of the government, why we needed it, how it was going to work, all that kind of stuff. 85 essays, so there's a lot of information in here, and it's really important information. I mean, today, right now, there are judges and there are lawyers and there are lawmakers and historians who are out there using the Federalist collection of essays in order to interpret the Constitution. When you say, what did they mean by this in the Constitution, this very important document that we need to use, they're able to look at the Federalists and see exactly what they mean, because the same people that wrote the Constitution were writing this Federalist and the reasons behind what they were doing in the Constitution. So it was obvious from the beginning that a lot of states, there was just a clear majority of Federalists, and so very quickly the Constitution got ratified there in Delaware, in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, in Georgia, Connecticut. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 states that are very quickly on board, and we only need 9 to hit that number in order to actually start the Constitution up and start using it. All right, and so but the problem was a lot of the states that were way more important were really close between Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and really needed a lot of debate. So we're going to learn in the next few slides about the debate in Massachusetts, in Virginia, and New York, these big states that were really important to get on board, that went all the way down to the wire. In Massachusetts, which was a very important state, the Anti-Federalists were the majority, and so they needed to be convinced to ratify this Constitution. A couple of people, John Hancock and Sam Adams, both who signed the Declaration of Independence, were against it. They were Anti-Federalists, right? And so they had to be, them and their supporters needed to be convinced of what to do. And so Sam Adams, he said, this guy right here, okay, he said, I'll just reject the Constitution. I'm going to vote against it unless it protects certain rights. As a matter of fact, his exact words were that the said Constitution be never construed to authorize Congress to infringe the just liberty of press or the rights of conscience, or to prevent the people of the United States from keeping their own arms, or to subject the people to unreasonable searches and seizures of their persons, papers, or possessions. So basically saying, if you don't say that the government can't do this, then we're not going to sign on to this. And so the Federalists made changes. They made changes quick. They adapted so that they could get these people on their side. They said, we will add a Bill of Rights when this Constitution is ratified. What is a Bill of Rights? Bill of Rights was an attachment. As soon as it was ratified, and that were amendments to the Constitution that guaranteed fundamental individual rights. And they also said part of that Bill of Rights, Anti-Federalists, to help you out, will say that all powers that we don't mention in this Constitution go to the states. Okay, so the states will still have a lot of power. And then John Hancock was won over because the Federalists came and said, I know you're going to run for president. We'll support you if you just sign on to this thing. And so he got his people on board. It was still a very close vote, but 187 members voted to ratify it and 168 voted against it. All right, and soon thereafter, before the next big battle came, Maryland, South Carolina, and New Hampshire ratified. However, even with we had 5 before, plus Massachusetts, plus 1, 2, 3, we've got 9 now, and we can start it. The Federalists felt like they still needed Virginia and New York, these really big, powerful states, to be on their side before they could really have a successful government. So they waited to enact it until they could get those two on their side. So they still had a lot of work to do. Take a moment to write out the answer to this checkpoint question. Couple other big states that we're going to talk about here, Virginia and New York. Virginia, the Anti-Federalists there made a really strong argument, and they were really worried, just like the other states, that there was just a lack of these protection of people's rights, right? That Bill of Rights was really important. And so the promises of the Bill of Rights kind of brought in the governor at the time, which was Edmund Randolph, okay? And Edmund Randolph, he was part of the Constitutional Convention. He was there, but he didn't sign it because he felt like this Bill of Rights was necessary, all right? And so it was a lot of debate continued to happen, and it was still very, 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 very close, with only 89 voting for and 79 voting against the Constitution. Then New York was left, but New York, most of the members were Anti-Federalists. So it was going to be really, really hard to convince them, all right? And so what ended up happening is Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, who were Federalists, they came together and they were able to delay the vote. They were able to discuss and discuss and discuss and stop the vote from happening until New York heard news that Virginia and New Hampshire had both joined. So now there are 11 of the 14 states had joined. Okay, and so they realized that, you know what, if they voted against it, they were going to be surrounded by states who had ratified and just trying to operate on their own in this area, because, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New Jersey had all joined already. So they were going to be surrounded by all of these people who were trying to go for the Constitution, and they would be against it. All right. And as a matter of fact, New York City said, we will secede from the state of New York and join another state or act independently or whatever if you vote against this Constitution. Still, it was very, very close because there were so many Anti-Federalists in New York. Okay. And so 30 people voted for the Constitution, and 27 voted against it. So very close, but it did get ratified in New York as well. So by July of 1788, all of the states except for Rhode Island and North Carolina had ratified the government, and the government could be started. They felt comfortable with that. They thought, well, they'll get along with us pretty soon. We just have to start it and show them how well the government works. Okay, and so the first meeting of the new Congress happened on March 4th, 1789, before North Carolina or Rhode Island ratified. That's when the government really started to get rolling. Okay, North Carolina, as soon as it was ratified and they saw that the Bill of Rights were proposed on November of 1789, they ratified the Constitution as well and joined them. And so now it was just Rhode Island, and Rhode Island waited a long time. They waited almost an entire another year. Okay, they waited until May of 1790 until the government had been operating for a while and they saw it working, and they still just barely passed it through. And a big problem was that people, normal people, not necessarily in these conventions, but normal people really were not super sure that this was going to work. They had just tried to put together the Articles of Confederation, and that had failed spectacularly. So now they're thinking, oh, I'm not sure this is going to work. But confidence really started to grow when, with the Electoral College, voted George Washington unanimously as the first president of the United States. And they thought, if anybody can make this country go, it's our hero, George Washington. With all of the Federalist promises of the Bill of Rights and the Anti-Federalists wanting it, it was really the first priority of the new Congress. They had to get in and create this Bill of Rights. And so James Madison wrote it down. He took a lot of the ideas from a couple of things in Virginia, the Virginia Declaration of Rights and Virginia statutes for religious freedom. Okay, and he looked at these and thought, what are the rights that we need to get down and put in these first 10 amendments? And so he agreed, and they agreed on 12 amendments. And those amendments were sent to Congress. All right, Congress looked at them. They approved 10 of them. And so the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments. It is the amendments that are protecting of rights. Okay, and so basically what it does is 1 through 8 are in charge of these individual rights. Okay, so if we look at 1 through 8 right here, okay, that's individual rights. Individual people, what are their rights? They have the right to, number 1, freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, petition. Number 2, they have the right to have guns, to bear arms. Right? Number 3, they have the right to not have soldiers live in their house. That quartering of soldiers was shut down. Number 4 has to do with arrests and searches and how that works. Right? Number 5 has to do with the rights of people that are accused by crimes. Number 6, rights of people on trial. Okay. Number 7, another trial thing that is on civil cases dealing with money. Okay, and number 8 is just a limit on the punishment the government can give for people that have been found guilty of a crime, right? And then 9 and 10 were different too. From those, that was just like general ones. They were saying, where does the power go? They said, if there's any rights we couldn't think of with number 9, okay, people have those too. The national government can't take them away just because we didn't think of them. All right, so number 9 limits the power of national government. All right, and number 10 said any powers that we didn't think of in this Constitution, those automatically go to the states. All right, so the states get all powers that we did not think of, and so those were kind of the exact rights and the exact amendments that were needed to make the Anti-Federalists happy at this time. And so the Bill of Rights kind of put a bow on it, and the Constitution was here to stay. Take some time to write out 3 questions that you have from the notes so far. You don't have those questions, you can make test questions that you might see on a quiz or a test from the material we just went over.